The stranger in the woods camping was always something I loved. There was something about being out in the wilderness, disconnected from everything, that made me feel at peace. That was before this trip. I was 23 at the time, and my cousin Cody and I decided to camp deep in the forest, far from any main trails. Cody had been camping all his life. He was the expert, and I just followed his lead. We set up camp in a small clearing, built a fire, and cooked up some steaks. The sky darkened, and the forest around us became a wall of black. We played cards, listened to music, and just enjoyed the solitude. But that's when we heard it, humming. It was faint at first, just beyond the trees, but it was unmistakably human. We both froze. The music was off now, and the only sounds were the crackling fire and that slow, eerie tune floating through the darkness. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the noise, but there was nothing there. The sound had stopped. Cody and I exchanged a look, and though he tried to play it off, I could tell he was on edge too. A few minutes later, something landed in the middle of our campsite. A stick. It wasn't small either. It had been thrown, not dropped. Cody stood up and yelled into the woods, "If you're messing with us, you better get lost." Silence. Then the sound of footsteps retreating into the woods. I told Cody we should move, but he refused. Hiking in the dark wasn't safe. Instead, we decided to take shifts. One of us would stay up while the other slept. Cody volunteered to stay up first. I crawled into my tent and into my sleeping bag, trying to shake the unease in my stomach. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. At some point, I woke up. I didn't know why at first, but then I saw it. A head peering into my tent. It looked like Cody, same short hair, same height, but the face was too dark to make out. I rubbed my eyes and groggily mumbled, "Is it my turn?" The head didn't respond. Instead, I heard the zipper slide back up and the shadow disappeared. I lay there for a second, still half asleep, until something clicked in my brain. Cody wouldn't just stare at me like that. I sat up, heart pounding. I could hear footsteps moving away from my tent. I unzipped my tent and stepped out. The fire had died. The clearing was quiet. Cody's tent was zipped shut. I rushed over, unzipped his tent, and saw him fast asleep. I grabbed his shoulder and shook him violently. "Cody, someone's here." He woke up groggy and confused, but when he saw my face, he grabbed his bear spray and got out of the tent. We stood there in silence, listening, and then that same humming came from the trees. Slow, distant, moving. Cody whispered, "Get in my tent, now." I sprinted to my tent, grabbed my sleeping bag, and froze. The humming had gotten closer. I didn't look. I didn't breathe. I just ran back to Cody's tent. We zipped ourselves inside and waited, bear spray in hand. Neither of us slept much after that. Every crack of a branch, every rustling leaf made my heart jump. We stayed like that until the sun finally started to rise. As soon as there was enough light, we packed up camp in silence. Neither of us wanted to be there any longer than we had to. When we made it back to the car, Cody finally spoke. Maybe it was just some hiker messing with us. I didn't answer, because in my head I kept seeing that face in the dark, watching me, unmoving. I haven't been camping since. I was seeing this girl for a few weeks. We'd been on 2 dates. Her name was Fee. We matched on a dating app, and eventually met a few days later. She was 4 years older than me. Our first date was drinks, and our second date we went out with my friends on a weekend. My friends had neutral opinions about her. They thought she was, quote, nice and kind of quiet. They'd later reveal their actual thoughts on her, but I'll get to that later. Phoebe invited me to an upcoming high school reunion party. She told me she didn't want to go alone, and honestly, after she came to hang out with my friends, and I felt like I owed her. This reunion party was falling on a random Saturday in the fall. It wasn't organized by her school, though she told me that it was organized by this rich guy from her class, and it was being hosted at this house. I haven't had my high school reunion yet, but as far as I know, these things are usually held at bars or catering halls. We got to this guy's house, and it was admittedly a fancy-looking house. It had gated driveway, but no fancy cars parked anywhere in sight. I thought was maybe the owner parked his car in the garage. During the party, East and West ebbed into the house. It felt like everyone was staring. It was more specifically me. Few people came up to Phoebe and hugged her hello, then shifted their attention to me. I felt almost like I was being interrogated with some of the questions these people were asking me, like my whole life story, what I do for a living, who I live with. Finally, Phoebe pulled "You so I only need to got talk to more people," who I also felt like were asking really personal and weird questions. There was also something about all the people in here. They seemed to be older looking than 28, which was the age. Phoebe told me she was some of these people looked well into their 30s. I made a comment on that to Phoebe and she said, "Yeah, some of these people aren't aging too well." I asked if she remembers all these people and she said yes. I then asked who the party host was. I was curious to meet the owner of this big house. She said she hadn't seen him yet throughout the entirety of being there. I felt like everybody was shooting meddaggers. They wouldn't look away either. I whispered that to Phoebe and she said back, "It's probably because they're wondering who I am at the time." That was the only logical explanation I could think of. Too, it's hard to explain the growing awkwardness at this party. But I can assure you, this was not what a normal high school reunion would be like. There was no music, and everyone was dressed weirdly, not like normal 28-year-olds. But that's the other thing. None of these people looked like they were in their 20s. I was getting uncomfortable with some of the stares. I was getting in the room we were in, so I told Phoebe, "I'm going to run to the bathroom. Realistically, I just want to get out of that room and explore the house a little bit." I didn't have a drink in my hand or anything to make me feel I was just walking around this giant house empty-handed, and anyone I passed stared at me. To say it felt out of place would be the understatement of the century. I found the bathroom and stepped inside. Even though I didn't have to go, I locked myself inside just to sit and rather myself take a break from the awkwardness outside. I texted all my friends about how weird this reunion was, and wondering how I could convince Phoebe to leave early. We'd already been there about 30 to 45 minutes, and this unnamed mystery party host was nowhere to be seen. Phoebe texted me, "Where are you?" I replied, "In the bathroom, give me a minute." Then I followed that up with, "This party is really weird. I'm down to leave soon." She said, "Why?" I said, "Everyone's being weird." Then someone knocked on the bathroom door, so I couldn't sit in there anymore. I was shed my hands quick and left the bathroom, and the guy waiting outside, who looked like one of the younger ones, said in a very low voice to me, "You should leave, that girl isn't who she says she is." I froze for a second, then said, "Phoebe has said whatever she told you her name is." Then asked what she told me this party was, and I said that she told me it was a high school reunion. The guy then smirked and said, "Do these people look like they're going to a high school reunion?" I left it off with an, I quote, "Trust me, leave sooner than later." And then he walked into the bathroom and shut the door. I almost knocked on the door to get them to come out and further explain, but I thought for a second I was already suspicious and uncomfortable in this house. That guy just confirmed something weird is going on here. I walked straight to the front door without drawing attention to myself. I still felt people staring at me as I walked to the door. I walked straight from my car in the street and drove home. Phoebe texted me asking where I went. I didn't answer. When I got home, I looked up her number on white pages. That number was not associated with the name Phoebe. The name that came up was Claire Foster. The address that I picked her up at both times is also different than the address that came up on white pages, which made me realize I never saw her leave the house. She was already waiting on the sidewalk. Both times I replied to her text, "I had to leave, I'm sorry," and blocked her number. My friends all made jokes and they told me she thought she was weird and off from the start, but they didn't want to tell me that and make me feel bad. My one friend joked that it sounded like I was in the movie Get Out. My friends and family all have had little theories as to what was going on. Some people would even think I exaggerated the whole thing until I told them about the fake name the girl gave me, the guy telling me to leave sooner than. The thing in the trees. I grew up hearing my dad say, "Don't be afraid of ghosts, fear the living." I never really understood what he meant until one winter at my family's cabin in Oregon. After my dad passed, the cabin was set to be sold. I decided to spend a few weeks there to clear my head. It was deep in the woods, surrounded by towering pine trees and distant mountains. Aside from 2 other cabins, which were completely vacant, there was no one around for miles. For the first couple of days, everything was peaceful. My dog, Midnight, and I spent our time playing in the snow, snowboarding, and relaxing by the fireplace at night. But then, on the 3rd day, something changed. While outside with Midnight, I noticed footprints in the snow circling the cabin. They weren't mine. They weren't my dog's. They led into the woods and vanished into the trees. It had been snowing all morning, so whoever left them had been there recently. That night, Midnight started acting strange. He kept pacing, his ears twitching at sounds I couldn't hear. Then suddenly, he bolted downstairs. I lay in bed, listening to him sniff around, his nails clicking against the hardwood. After a few minutes, he ran back upstairs, whining and staring at me expectantly. I sighed, grabbed his leash, and took him outside. But Midnight didn't want to pee. Instead, he pulled me toward the woods, his nose buried in the snow near the side of the house. His eyes kept flicking toward the roof. Something about the way he was acting made my stomach tighten. He wasn't barking, just watching, waiting. Then, from above, I heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the roof. I froze. The steps were too far apart to be from an animal. It sounded like a person. Midnight growled, his body stiff. I swallowed hard and yanked him back inside, locking the door behind me. I tried to convince myself I was just imagining things. Maybe it was a branch or snow shifting under the wind. But then, later that night, I saw it. I stepped onto the balcony, lighting a cigarette to calm my nerves. The sky was clear and the trees cast long shadows against the snow. That's when my eyes caught something crouching in the highest tree. It was tall, too tall, and pale. Its arms stretched impossibly long above its head, gripping the branches as it perched like a predator. Its face was expressionless, its mouth slightly open. It didn't move, it was just watching me. Midnight whimpered behind me, pacing nervously. My entire body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I thought about shining my flashlight at it, but something deep inside me, something primal, told me not to. Instead, I backed away into the cabin, pulling Midnight with me. I slammed the door, locked it, and yanked the curtains shut. My hands were shaking as I crawled into bed, trying to convince myself that I hadn't just seen what I thought I had. But then, at exactly 3 a.m., I heard it, a soft tapping at the glass. It was rhythmic, almost gentle, like someone was beckoning me. Midnight refused to go near the door this time. He just sat there, ears pinned back, staring. And then, in the silence, I heard my dad's voice in my head. "Don't open the door." I stayed in bed, heart hammering, forcing myself to stay still. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, the sun was rising, casting golden light through the trees. I didn't even hesitate. I packed my things, loaded Midnight into the car, and got the hell out of there. I never told my mom what happened. I don't think I even wanted to know what that thing was. All I know is that I will never go back to that cabin. Craigslist trap. I was searching Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace for a new phone, something cheap but in good condition. After scrolling for what felt like hours, I found it, an iPhone, factory sealed, only $300. It was a ridiculously good deal for the time. The seller, a guy named Melvin, seemed easygoing over text. He sent a video of the box, still sealed, and assured me it was factory unlocked. The only catch? The location on his ad said he was nearby, but after we started talking, he suddenly told me he had moved an hour north. I wasn't thrilled about the drive, but I also didn't want to pass up the deal. I convinced my friend Martina to come along by bribing her with free food, and we set off around 8:30 p.m. Melvin said he only did sales in police station parking lots to avoid scams. That actually made me feel more comfortable, so I didn't think much of it. But when we arrived, the lot was completely empty. Aside from a few parked squad cars, there was no sign of anyone waiting for us. I called Melvin. He picked up, his voice rushed. "Hey, my car broke down a couple miles away. Can you come help me jump it?" I checked the location he sent. He was on the side of a completely empty road, surrounded by woods on both sides. Martina gave me a look. "No way. This is sketchy. We're going home." I hesitated. We'd driven an hour for this. I told her we'd just drive past the location, just to see. As we neared the spot, we saw a black car with its headlights off, parked on the shoulder. It looked empty. There was no one inside. Martina whispered, "Keep driving." I didn't need to be told twice. The second we passed the car, my phone started ringing. It was Melvin. I ignored the call. Another call. Another. Then a text. "I saw you pass me. Why didn't you stop? Turn around." Nope. We drove straight to a small diner a few miles away. We were still on edge, but Martina, being the positive one, tried to laugh it off. "Okay, you owe me food." As soon as we sat down, a man walked in. He wore a dirty navy hoodie with the hood pulled up, his hands shoved in his pockets. He sat at the bar, ordered a coffee, and kept glancing at us. I leaned toward Martina. "Don't look now, but I think that's him." The moment he spoke to the waitress, my stomach dropped. It was his voice. "Melvin," I whispered to Martina, "we need to leave. Now." I waved the waitress over and quietly asked for the check. She asked if something was wrong, and I noticed Melvin watching me as I answered. We paid, gulped down our coffee, and hurried out. As soon as we got in my car, Martina's voice shook. "Oh my God, he's getting up." I saw him leaving the diner, fast. I didn't wait. I sped out of the parking lot, flying down the road. But as we got on the highway, my tire pressure warning lit up. I knew instantly. He slashed my tire. The PSI was dropping fast. I had no choice but to pull over. I jumped out, confirmed the damage, and got to work replacing the tire. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that black car pull up. It didn't. We made it home safely, but the whole thing still haunts me. I still wonder, what would have happened if we had stopped at that car? The night I wasn't alone. When I was 8 years old, I was woken up in the middle of the night by the sound of my parents arguing downstairs. I cracked my bedroom door open and called out, confused. My mom quickly appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her face tense. "Go back to bed," she said firmly. I listened without question, sensing their stress. I heard the front door slam shut a few minutes later, then silence. I assumed they had left the house for some reason, so I went back to sleep. Sometime later, I woke up again. This time the sounds were different, subtle, careful movements downstairs. The sound of cabinets opening, the fridge door creaking. It wasn't chaotic like before. It was slow, deliberate. I thought maybe it was my older brother, Chris. He was 10 years older than me and often came home late, raiding the fridge for snacks. I turned over in bed, comforting myself with that explanation, until I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. They were slow, steady. They stopped right outside my bedroom door. The door creaked open. I didn't move. I just lay there staring into the darkness. There was no light in the hallway, so I could only make out the shadow of a head peeking in. Chris, no response. Mom? Dad? Nothing. "Who's there?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a breath. Still no answer. Then, as silently as it had opened, the door closed again. The footsteps faded back down the stairs. I sat up, confused but strangely unafraid. Maybe my dad had come home and was just checking on me? I tried to convince myself of that and drifted back to sleep. But something gnawed at me, something I couldn't shake. I woke up again and tiptoed downstairs, keeping the lights off as I approached the kitchen. That's when I saw him. A tall figure stood right in the middle of the kitchen, motionless. I stopped in my tracks. "Dad," I called out hesitantly. A deep, unfamiliar voice responded. "Go back upstairs." Every hair on my body stood on end. I didn't think. I just ran. I sprinted up the stairs, slammed my door, and dove under the covers, shaking. That wasn't my dad. It wasn't until I heard the front door open again and my parents' voices downstairs that the reality of what had just happened finally hit me. They were shocked to see me awake. My mom told me Chris had gotten into a car accident and they had rushed to the hospital to be with him. They had been gone for hours. I asked my dad if he had been in my room earlier. That's when my mom started screaming. My dad had forgotten to lock the front door in their rush to leave. Someone had been in the house with me the entire time.